A dusty truck stop, a Hell's Angel checking his oil, a skinny boy, sneakers held with duct tape, tugs his leather sleeve. In one hand, a wrinkled necktie. "Can you help me tie this? It's my daddy's suit. He's supposed to wear it today. His father died 2 nights ago, saving him. There's no man left to help him knot it for the funeral." Every biker tenses. Then Diesel kneels, tears carved through dust on 40 faces. That moment, a biker and a boy on the hardest day of his life, became a testament to what happens when we look past the leather and the ink. But this isn't just a story about one act of kindness. It's about the 40 men who showed up to a funeral and the chain reaction that started with a simple question. His name was Marcus, 8 years old, a wisp of a kid from a shotgun house 2 miles past the Selma city limit sign. His daddy, Leon, worked double shifts at the lumber mill, stacking boards until his back screamed. The only thing louder was his laugh. People said Marcus got his daddy's eyes, big, soft, the kind that hold the light even after the sun goes down. On Wednesday night, Leon pulled a 24-hour shift to cover a sick coworker. A few extra bucks toward Marcus's school shoes. The factory accident came at 4 in the morning. A forklift snapped its hydraulic line in Bay 7. Leon had 1 second to clock what was happening. He didn't use that second to save himself. He shoved his coworker clear and took the full blow. The mill foreman called it an act of God. Marcus just called it the night the world went dark. The funeral was set for Saturday. Marcus's mama, Celeste, sat at the kitchen table Thursday night with a pile of bills and an insurance policy that was supposed to be enough but wasn't. She didn't cry. She was beyond crying. She just kept staring at Leon's Sunday suit hanging on the back of the bedroom door, the tie draped over the hanger. Marcus watched her. He knew what missing meant. There was no uncle to call. Granddad was buried 2 summers back. No cousins, no deacons, no man left in that house who could stand at the mirror and knot a tie for a proper goodbye. So Friday afternoon, Marcus waited until his mama fell asleep on the couch from exhaustion. He pulled his daddy's suit jacket off the hanger, carefully, like it was made of glass, folded it over his arm and took the tie. Then he walked out the front door, down the gravel road, past the boarded-up Piggly Wiggly, toward the one place he'd seen men who looked like they knew how to handle a hard day. The truck stop sat at the crossroads, a dusty lot where semis idled and chrome glinted. But it was the motorcycles that drew Marcus. He'd seen them before, rumbling through town like rolling thunder. The men wore patches with 3 skulls and the words Devil's Vanguard stitched in red. Folks in Selma crossed the street when they rode by, but Marcus was 8 and his daddy was dead. He didn't have the luxury of fear. He walked right up to the biggest man in the lot, a mountain of leather checking the oil on a blacked-out road king. His brothers called him Diesel. 6'5", arms like concrete pillars, a graying beard woven with silver that caught the afternoon light. The other bikers tensed when they saw the little dark shadow moving toward their president. This was the kind of approach that ended with sirens, they thought, but Diesel didn't move. He just looked down. Marcus held up the tie. His voice barely broke the hum of the highway. "Can you help me tie this?" It wasn't a question so much as a surrender, a boy laying down the last thing he had. Every brother within earshot froze. Somebody's hand moved toward a pocket knife out of instinct, then stopped. Because they saw something. Diesel, a man who'd done 2 stretches in state and never flinched at a fight, was staring at that wrinkled strip of fabric like it was a live grenade. He bent down so his face was level with the boy. "Whose suit is that, little man?" Marcus swallowed. "It's my daddy. He's supposed to wear it tomorrow, but he can't because he's gone." And then, in a whisper that cut through 40 souls, he said, "This morning I told my mama I would be the man now. But I don't know how to tie a tie." The silence that followed was the kind that rewires a man's insides. Diesel's calloused hands, the ones that had thrown 1,000 punches and rebuilt 100 engines, reached out and took the tie as gently as a father taking a newborn from a midwife. He didn't speak. He draped it around the boy's neck, the collar of Leon's jacket swallowing the child's thin frame, and began to loop the silk with deliberate, slow precision. A double Windsor. The same knot his own father had taught him 40 years earlier, before the old man drank himself into the grave. As he worked, tears carved clean, dark lines through the road dust on the faces around him. The brothers, men who had never cried in public, not when burying their own, not when taking bullets, were undone by a child's dignity. One of them, a wiry road captain called Ghost, turned away and punched the side of a gas pump hard enough to dent the metal. When Diesel finished, he tugged the knot tight, straightened the collar, and for the first time let his voice go soft. "There you go, son. Now he's gonna see you sharp." Marcus looked up. "Sir, I ain't got no way to get there." That was the line that changed the shape of everything that followed. Diesel hoisted the boy onto the leather seat of his Harley, pulled out his phone, and made one call. Inside of an hour, 43 Hell's Angels from 3 chapters were rolling code toward a small country church just outside Selma, their chrome catching the last of the sun. They parked in a straight line, engines cutting one by one, and walked into that sanctuary as a silent army. The pastor nearly dropped his Bible. The organist stopped playing. And Celeste, standing at the front pew, looked up to see her boy walking hand in hand with giants, the tie pressed perfect against his chest, his daddy's suit swallowing him in love. That moment, a frightened widow and a legion of outlaws, is where the story pivots, but none of them knew yet that Saturday afternoon was not the end of the kindness. It was the birth of a promise that would crack the town of Selma wide open. The burial was at noon. After the dirt settled, the great iron machines started their engines, and everyone assumed the outlaws would roar back into the anonymity of the highway, leaving Selma to swallow its grief in silence. But Diesel didn't crank his throttle. He sat on his bike at the edge of the cemetery, watching the little house down the road from the church. A rundown shotgun with a tarp on one corner of the roof, and a yellow eviction notice pasted to the front window, the kind the bank slaps on 48 hours before the sheriff comes. Marcus stood on the porch, still wearing his daddy's jacket, staring at nothing. Behind him, the screen door banged loose in the wind, one hinge broken. Inside, Celeste sat at the kitchen table with her head in her hands and a stack of unpaid bills that had tripled just since Thursday. The life insurance payout was frozen until an investigation, and the lumber mill's owner, a man named Carter Hollies who also served as head deacon at First Selma Baptist, had sent his condolences along with a waiver. "Sign here," he wrote, "and we'll release $5,000. Just sign away your right to ask any more questions." Diesel, a man who'd spent 20 years learning to read the fine print in a county jail law library, rode up to the house alone. He handed Marcus a small box. Inside was a patch, the 3-skull logo of the Devil's Vanguard, with the word Prospect stitched beneath it. "You said you want to be the man now. Men keep their word. You're under our watch until this whole thing is square." Marcus didn't smile. He just looked at the patch like it was the first solid ground he'd stood on in days. Then Diesel walked inside and asked Celeste to show him the waiver. It took him about 90 seconds to spot the trap. The 5,000 was not a gift. It was a full settlement that would bar any future claim against the mill for gross negligence. The hydraulic line failure had been flagged in 3 separate maintenance reports. All 3 were ignored. 2 other workers had nearly been crushed in the same bay 18 months ago. The mill was a death trap, and Carter Hollies was trying to bury the truth before Monday morning. That was the moment the gentle gesture crystallized into something far more dangerous. Diesel made 2 calls from his flip phone. The first was to Ghost, his road captain, a man who'd spent a decade as a paralegal before a felony conviction pushed him into a different kind of tribe. Ghost had retained a photographic memory and a deep, abiding hatred for rich men who crushed poor families with paper. The second call was to a brother named Preacher, a 62-year-old minister inked head to toe who ran a small biker church 2 counties over. His congregation was small, but his connections in the labor movement ran deep. Within 4 hours, Ghost had pulled the mill's OSHA records and found a history of citations that Hollies had paid off like parking tickets. Within 6 hours, Preacher had gotten a letter into the hands of a state labor investigator who'd been looking for a clean case. And at dusk, 40 Vanguard members assembled at a campsite behind the cemetery, their faces lit by a single fire. Diesel laid it out plain. This wasn't just about a tie and a funeral anymore. This was about a boy who'd just been orphaned by corporate greed and a town that would rather shame a biker than question its own deacon. But the town wasn't ready. By Monday, whispers had stiffened into concrete opposition. The same pastor who'd nearly dropped his Bible at the funeral now stood behind his pulpit and informed his congregation that the church would not associate with the criminal element that had desecrated Leon's memorial. He didn't say Deacon Hollies had threatened to withdraw his tithe if the bikers were welcomed. He didn't have to. The message was clear. The funeral had been an intrusion, not an honor. The deacons voted unanimously to reject any offer of repair or charity from the Devil's Vanguard. Celeste received a typed letter from the church office announcing that Leon's memorial fund, which had raised $4,000 from the community, would be held in trust and released only when she agreed to cease contact with the motorcycle club. The letter was signed by Carter Hollies. That letter snapped something in Marcus. The boy who'd held a wrinkled necktie with trembling hands on Friday now stood in front of a bank of television cameras on Tuesday, wearing his new patch and reading from a statement Diesel had helped him write. His voice cracked, but it didn't break. "My daddy saved a man's life. The mill let him die. And now the church wants us to turn away the only people who helped me be a man." It made the evening news in Montgomery, then Birmingham, then Atlanta. The phone at the Vanguard clubhouse started ringing off the hook, but the other shoe hadn't dropped yet, because while Marcus was speaking, Ghost was in a motel room 2 towns over with Leon's coworker, the man he'd pushed out of the way in Bay 7. That man, a 55-year-old floor hand named Otis, had been sitting on a secret for 48 hours, terrified to open his mouth. The mill had offered him precisely nothing, but the supervisor had made it very clear that if he talked to any investigator, his back pay and his pension would evaporate. Otis had a disabled wife. He couldn't afford to be noble, but then he saw a little boy on TV wearing a skull patch and he got in his truck and drove. Ghost recorded Otis's full statement. The forklift's hydraulic line had been visibly leaking the morning of the accident. Otis filed a report. The shift lead threw it in the trash. Hollies knew. Hollies had always known. The gross negligence wasn't a mistake. It was a business strategy. The recording was damning, and by Wednesday it would be on every local station. But first, there was a confrontation that changed the entire equation. That night, as Diesel and 3 brothers escorted Celeste to a meeting with the labor investigator, a sheriff's deputy pulled them over on Route 8. The deputy, a young man with a nervous tick in his jaw, ordered them out of their vehicles and told Diesel he was being charged with trespassing from the cemetery, a felony that could revoke his bond status and send him back to prison. He pointed his flashlight at Marcus, who was in the backseat, and said the boy would be taken into protective custody for being in the presence of a known felon. The deputy's hand was shaking so badly the light beam danced. Diesel didn't raise his voice. He just looked past the badge to the cruiser's dash cam, which was blinking red, and said 2 words. "Call Hollies." The deputy froze. He hadn't mentioned Hollies. The whole thing was a setup, and the dash cam was rolling. That video, released a day later, would reveal the moment a small town's power structure began to eat itself. But in the thick of it, with a child in the backseat and a badge glinting under the streetlights, the immediate choreography took a turn no one expected. The other brothers dismounted slowly, forming a silent line between the deputy and the car. They didn't touch their weapons. They just stood there. The deputy's resolve crumbled. He got back in his cruiser and drove away without a word, leaving the bikers on the dark road with a boy who was learning, in real time, what it meant to be protected by outlaws. That moment, that eerie standoff, was the pivot. It split Selma into 2 camps. Those who saw a gang of thugs intimidating an officer, and those who saw 4 men and a child refusing to be crushed. And just when it seemed the conflict couldn't intensify any further, Ghost's recording of Otis hit the airwaves. The county prosecutor, himself Hollies' brother-in-law, immediately announced a gag order, but the Vanguard had already sent copies to every newsroom in the state. The genie was out of the bottle. The mill owner, the church, the courthouse, all now arrayed against a biker club and a grieving widow. And then came the phone call that made Diesel's blood run cold. The tip that Hollies had hired private security to take back control of the narrative by any means necessary. As the sun rose on Thursday, Ghost intercepted a radio signal from an unmarked van parked across from Celeste's house. Inside were two men with no licenses and a file that included photos of every club member's family. The line had been crossed, and the only thing standing between the Devil's Vanguard and all-out war was a promise made to a boy with his daddy's tie. Diesel read the intel from Ghost and didn't blink. He gave one order: no retaliation, no broken jaws, nothing that would put a single child in danger. Then he dispatched Preacher to move Celeste and Marcus to an undisclosed safe house that night, an old farm owned by a retired member who grew peaches and asked no questions. He sent Ghost to the local TV station with a copy of the van's plates and the photos of the men inside. The lead story at 10 o'clock was not about a biker gang causing trouble. It was grainy footage of two armed men in an unmarked van staking out a widow's home, and the question the anchor asked: who sent them? By Friday, the state labor investigator had enough. She served a subpoena on the mill for every maintenance log, safety report, and internal email from the past 5 years, along with a notice of criminal investigation into gross negligence and felony witness intimidation. Carter Hollies responded with a smile on camera and a law firm from Birmingham, $200 an hour, spinning calmly about a terrible tragedy and a community exploited by a motorcycle gang with a vendetta. Behind the scenes, he did something far more reckless. He called the county sheriff and demanded a raid on the Devil's Vanguard clubhouse, claiming they were stockpiling illegal firearms. The sheriff, who owed his election to Hollies' money, obliged. Saturday morning, 6 cruisers and a tactical van rolled up the gravel road to the clubhouse. They broke down the door with a battering ram, guns drawn, expecting a firefight. What they found instead was a dozen bikers sitting around a table folding laundry for a domestic violence shelter, the entire patchwork of the Vanguard's charity operation spread out before them. Ghost was on the phone with a reporter from Reuters. He tipped them off an hour earlier. The raid was broadcast live. The optics were catastrophic. A sheriff's deputy could be heard on a hot mic muttering, "Where are the guns?" There were no illegal guns. There was just a room full of leather vests and industrial-sized bottles of fabric softener. The sheriff's department became a national joke by lunchtime, but Hollies wasn't laughing. He just handed Diesel the moral high ground on a silver platter. That same afternoon, a new figure entered the fight from an unexpected corner. A church secretary named Loretta, who had typed the letter demanding Celeste break ties with the club, walked into WKLV News and asked to go on air. She was trembling, holding a cassette tape. She sat down and told the world that she had recorded the deacon's meeting where Hollies laid out his plan. The tape was played in full. His voice, oily and unhurried, explained that if Celeste signed the waiver, the mill's insurance would pay out a policy that covered gross mismanagement but not criminal negligence. The payout was $8 million, and Hollies intended to use a portion to build a new fellowship hall named after himself. He told the deacons that keeping the bikers discredited was a spiritual duty. "We've got the badge, the pulpit, and the purse," he said. "What do they have? A little boy in a dead man's suit." The air went out of the room. Loretta was in tears. She said she'd been sick about it for days, but when she saw the raid on the news and realized the sheriff was in on it, she couldn't stay silent. The confession ripped through Selma like a flash flood. The same pastor who denounced the Vanguard from the altar now stood mute in front of his congregation, unable to answer a single shouted question. 3 deacons resigned before sunset. The church's official phone line was overwhelmed with callers threatening to pull funding. Diesel, watching from the safe house with Marcus asleep on the couch and Celeste finally resting, didn't gloat. He called a brother in Montgomery who ran a legal aid clinic and asked him to represent Loretta pro bono. Then he called the state attorney general's office and requested a meeting. That request, combined with the tape and the dash cam video of the deputy's botched attempt to arrest him, forced the AG's hand. By Monday, a special prosecutor was appointed. By Tuesday, a grand jury was being convened. But Hollies wasn't done. In a final, desperate move, he leaked a document to a fringe website claiming Diesel had a sealed juvenile record involving violence against a child. It was a fabrication so flimsy that a cursory records check debunked it in hours, but the stain was the point. It was designed to make anyone associated with the club toxic. The story circulated just long enough for a local judge to issue a temporary restraining order barring any club member from being within 500 feet of Marcus or Celeste, pending a child welfare hearing. The order was signed at 4:30 on a Friday afternoon, the classic hour for legal ambushes. For the first time, Diesel's composure cracked, not in rage but in grief. He sat on the porch of the safe house staring at the paper. Marcus came out and sat next to him. The boy didn't say anything for a long time. Then he said, "Daddy told me once that if a man has to tear you down to win, he's already lost. You just gotta wait for the world to see it." Diesel looked at the boy. "Your daddy was a smart man." "I know," Marcus said. "That's why I asked you to tie the tie." He said a tie is a straight line on a crooked day. And he said the man who ties it right is the man you can trust. That moment, a child's quiet wisdom, was the turning point the story needed. It wasn't a courtroom drama that broke the dam. It was a line from a dead father spoken through his son. Ghost recorded part of that conversation on his phone with Marcus's permission, and it spread not through newsrooms but through social media, passed from parent to parent, from teacher to teacher. The hashtag #TieThatBind started trending in Alabama, then the whole South. By Wednesday, the judge who signed the restraining order was facing a recall petition with 50,000 signatures. The special prosecutor expedited the grand jury, and Otis's full testimony, along with the maintenance reports and Loretta's tape, was leaked to a documentary crew that had quietly embedded with the vanguard. The film wasn't about a gang. It was about a system closing ranks to protect its own, and the unlikely alliance that refused to be silenced. As the grand jury returned its first indictments, nomming Hollies and 2 shift managers on charges of criminally negligent homicide and conspiracy, a shift occurred. Not just in the legal case, but in the town. At the gas station on Route 14, a clerk who'd once refused to serve Ghost now kept a donation jar for Marcus's college fund. The hardware store owner, who'd put a no-colors sign in his window after the funeral, took it down and replaced it with a sign that read, "All are welcome." The change was messy and incomplete, but it was real. And then on the morning the trial was set to begin, a convoy of 60 black motorcycles appeared on the horizon, not from one club but from half a dozen. The Brotherhood of the Road, a coalition of MCs from 3 states, had come to escort Marcus and his mother to the courthouse. They parked in perfect silence, a wall of chrome and leather, as a small boy in his father's jacket, tie straight and true, walked inside to face the man who'd stolen everything. The hallway was thick with bikers, lawyers, reporters, and townsfolk, and at the center of it all stood Diesel, his hand on Marcus's shoulder, a promise kept. That image would be broadcast around the globe. But what came next in that courtroom, the testimony that shattered the defense, and the verdict that redefined a community, is where the deepest meaning of this story and its most unexpected inheritance was finally revealed. The trial lasted 11 days, but the verdict came in less than 3 hours. The testimony that broke the defense was not the OSHA reports or the maintenance logs, though they were damning. It was a frail man in a pressed shirt who walked to the stand with a cane. Otis. The man Leon had saved. He looked straight at Carter Hollies, whose lawyers had spent 2 days trying to paint him as a disgruntled employee with an axe to grind. The defense attorney asked him if he was testifying because the bikers had promised him money. Otis leaned into the microphone and said, "I'm testifying because a man shoved me out of the way of a machine and died in my place. And that man's boss called it an act of God so he wouldn't have to pay for the new fellowship hall." Courtroom went silent. You could hear the air conditioning hum. When Loretta took the stand next, clutching her black leather Bible, she played the tape one more time. The sound of Hollies' voice saying, "We've got the badge, the pulpit, and the purse," echoed through the chamber. 3 jurors visibly winced. The prosecutor rested. The defense called no one. In closing arguments, the state described a chain of choices, a machine that had been grinding men down for years. oiled by intimidation and flavored with prayers. The jury returned unanimous verdicts: guilty on 3 counts of criminally negligent homicide for the previous injuries ignored, and guilty of conspiracy to obstruct justice. Hollies was sentenced to 18 years. The mill was placed in receivership and ordered to pay its full liability. The waiver Celeste had been forced to sign was ruled void. The $8 million policy, held in escrow, was released to the families of every worker who'd been cheated. For Celeste and Marcus, the financial number was life-altering, but the real compensation came in a different shape entirely. The morning after the verdict, Diesel walked into the safe house and knelt down in front of the boy. "Your daddy's tie is in a shadow box at the clubhouse now, with a plaque that says the tie that taught us what we are. You can come see it whenever you want, but I'm offering you something else." Marcus looked at him. "What?" "I'm offering you 40 uncles who will never let you walk into a hard day alone again. Not because we're saints. We ain't. But because you reminded us that the only thing that separates a man from a monster is whether he'll bend down when a child asks for help." That was the family. The one the boy thought he'd lost forever. It didn't replace his father, but it widened the circle so that grief had room to breathe. Over the next decade, Marcus grew up splitting his time between his mother's new house and the clubhouse, learning to ride a dirt bike, learning to weld from tank and read law from Ghost. The club put him through college. He chose law, not to punish the guilty, but to keep families from being crushed beneath legal language they couldn't parse. When he graduated from the University of Alabama School of Law, the entire Devil's Vanguard chapter attended, sitting in the back in pressed black shirts, their colors hidden under blazers per Diesel's order. Today we're just family, not a spectacle. But at the reception, something happened that no one expected. Marcus disappeared for a moment, then returned holding something behind his back. He stopped in front of Diesel, who was sitting awkwardly in a plastic chair trying not to tug at his collar. "I've been waiting 16 years to do this," Marcus said. He pulled out the wrinkled necktie, the very one from the truck stop, carefully preserved. And with the same deliberate, slow precision Diesel had used all those years ago, he tied a perfect double Windsor around the old biker's neck. "Now you're sharp," Marcus said. Diesel, the 300-pound former convict who hadn't cried since his own mother's funeral, buried his face in his hands and wept. The room of lawyers and bikers went stone quiet, the same kind of sacred hush that had fallen that day at the back of the church when 40 outlaws stood in honor of a stranger. What began as a simple request at a dusty truck stop just outside Selma had not only toppled a corrupt dynasty, but had stitched 2 broken families into one. The country church that once tried to ban the bikers now holds an annual community breakfast paid for by the Devil's Vanguard, and the pastor who denounced them now volunteers in the kitchen. The mill site is a memorial park, a small plaque in the corner marking where Leon saved Otis. And every year on the anniversary of the funeral, the club rides out to the cemetery where a father is buried, and a boy who is now a man stands beside his mother reading a letter from Leon that was found years later in the back of a Bible. It said, "Son, be a straight line on a crooked day. The man who ties the knot isn't the one who pulls hardest. He's the one who shows up." A wrinkled necktie at a dusty truck stop, and a child who just wanted his father to look sharp for heaven. That's all it was. That one vulnerable ass cut through 40 years of suspicion, through ink and leather, and every bad assumption the town of Selma had ever made. The Devil's Vanguard didn't ride in looking to take down a corrupt mill owner or reform a church. They rode in because a boy asked for help, and a giant named Diesel bent his knee. But here's what lingers with me, and maybe with you too. How many Marcuses do we walk past every day? Not just children, but anyone wearing a label we've been taught to fear. The story rewired a whole community not because bikers are secretly saints, but because one man refused to flinch when a small hand tugged his sleeve. So, I'm asking you the same question that story asks of all of us. Who are you when the tie is held up? Be honest in the comments. Not the answer that makes you look good, the real one. If this moved you, drop a heart below, subscribe so you don't miss the next story that proves we're more alike than we are different. and share this with someone who's forgotten that a straight line can still be drawn on a crooked day. Thanks for watching. See you on the next ride.